My name is Ken Shelton, and you have found the gathering place where we meet most every Sunday evening to talk about whatever is on our minds. And since this is Memorial Day weekend, we want to talk about things that are memorable, people who are memorable, and what you do with your memories when you'd rather them not be memorable. All things memory related, that's what we're about tonight. And I'm here with our hosts, Ben and Talora Bookie. Ben, wave, and Talora, wave. That way you know which one is which. And besides, you can see our names. Tom Ray is our announcer, and he's usually with us, but he'll be late this evening because of a pressing responsibility. And so at this point, we want you to call a friend, text a friend, and say, hey, watch the show, watch what's going on. And you can send us questions. You can let us know if you have comments or things that we'd like to mention. And we will certainly give it a whirl. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Brother Ben.
Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. And it is Memorial Day weekend, which is kind of an oxymoron, have a day weekend, but that's the old English teacher piece of me, I guess. But but we are celebrating that, at least in the United States. I know other countries have similar days for remembering, and ours has become really just for some people just a day off, and it's nothing more than that. For some people, it's really about remembering their lost loved ones. Tor and I are actually we'll go to the cemetery after we get done with this tonight, and put some flowers on some graves, and we do those things. And like Tom's joining us, and so he's waving at me. There we go. So,
hey, Tom.
Welcome, Tom Ray. So
hello.
So we do think about it in those terms of like, oh, let's remember, those that we have lost. And that can be kind of a double-edged sword, I think, for some people, and because some people don't want to remember, and they may not have fond memories of certain people in their lives. And so we'll spend some time just really talking about like, well, what do we do with that? Like, there are people we don't want to remember for various reasons. And only when we try not to remember and think about it or deal with those things, doesn't necessarily become perhaps harmful even to us. So we're going to talk about all of those things, but let's start with the memorial part. And like I said, we're going to the cemetery after this, and we're going to put flowers on Talora's mom's grave, but also my grandparents, whose house Talora and I live in. And so I thought if each of us would just kind of share, just a brief story about somebody that was important to us that we remember on this weekend, I thought that would be great. So I was going to kick it off and just talk about my grandma. And she died in now I forget, was it 2018? So
yeah.
And
I hear an echo behind you somewhere. Somebody has their volume on, and your voice is
Laura.
Sorry.
Might be me, who knows? So but so I'm gonna go so we're gonna go, and I'll put some flowers on my grandma's grave. And she always said like, oh, nobody's ever gonna come to take care of my tombstone when I'm gone, but she's not wrong. But she had 3 boys, and so not high on their priority list. They all have that same kind of mentality, like, well, she's not there, which is true. I do know where she's at. She loved Jesus, and so I know that she is in heaven. And so we're not going because she's there in any way, shape, or form. Well, I guess that's not true. She is. Her body's down there somewhere, but that's my morbid part, I guess. But but I'm gonna go remember, and just thinking about her and the important things that she did in my life. And like, my mom gardened, but my grandma really gardened. And so if you come to my house and you see flower beds everywhere full of flowers, that's a lot of it's still left from what my grandma had done. Some of it's just us trying to wrangle back into like decent shape the things that she had done, but I enjoy it, and that came from her. But one of the all really important pieces that I think about is, she taught Sunday school. She did Awana, and I'd spend the night here at this house a lot as a kid, and she would every night she'd be on her knees praying. She'd be in God's word, and she always had me there with her participating, and not just praying with her or asking. She would actually like we'd read things, and she'd ask me, well, what do you think God was saying here? And that had a profound effect on just one, when I read the Bible, like, oh, like God actually is speaking to us like in his word. And that a lot of that came from my grandma. So on this
On
weekend,
this
those
weekend,
things I remember.
so of course, I remember my mom. And my mom was, and I know I've talked about her on here before, but she loved Jesus. She loved Jesus. And the last few years of her life, she wasn't able to go to church just because of her health, but she would still pray, and she would still sing hymns. Like, she would just sing them to herself. She always said she's a congregational singer. She's not a singer, she's congregational. That's how she'd always explain it too. If somebody couldn't sing and they would do like a special, she would call it they're really just a congregational singer. So I always thought that was funny. But she yeah, she taught us that it doesn't matter what you've been through in life, that God always shows up, and he always walks alongside you, and he always is there. All you have to do is call out his name. But I wanted to share a Bible verse out of Joshua, because when we were talking about memorials, I was thinking about when they were putting the stones in the river. Is it River Jordan? And yeah, he told them, go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark. And this is Joshua chapter 4. The ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them they remind us that Jordan River stopped flowing when the ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. And just as the stones, the physical stones were memorials in my life, my mom was like the stones. And it was a memorial that reminded me that God's there.
Well, that's beautiful. I think originally Memorial Day was intended to honor fallen soldiers, men and women who had served our nation in foreign wars, World War One, Korean War, World War Two, and even further back. I have. I'm old enough that I have a grandfather who was born before the Civil War. That's how old I am. Come on, people, think about how old I am, and I just look like a kid. Anyway,
And they lived 900 years,
yeah.
right?
Uncle Methuselah told me. Now, so Ancestry, Ancestry.com or Family Ancestry, the channel that is usually affiliated with the Latter-day Saints, it probably is the most quickly populated. So that's what I want to talk about. Uh, I think of the verse of scripture that is probably in First Timothy. I'm not going to look it up. It may be Second Timothy. It is Paul speaking to Timothy. That's why I know it's in one of the Timothys. And he said, I remember the faith that is in you, which was also in your grandmother. Eunice and Lois were their names. It sounds like two people on a comedy show. Weren't they on Sanford and Sons? I think they were. Anyway, Eunice and Lois, and was in your mother also. I want to just talk about the people that gave me, handed me my faith. So obviously, my father and my mother would be primary because they were very actively engaged in church life and in worship and prayer in the home. It was a very, very important part of our lives. And I remember watching my father. I came through, I couldn't have been no more than five. Um, I came into the living room on a Sunday morning. We lived out on Mesa Day Lake in Waterford. And here's my dad sitting on a ottoman looking at the TV's grainy black and white TV. And he is just rapt with attention, caught up in what's going on. And I said, "What are you watching, Dad?" And he said, "I'm watching this guy. He's praying for people and they're being healed. Look at him." And it was Oral Roberts. It would have been 1958, roughly. And, all that burned in my memory. My dad had tremendous respect for anybody who operated in the gifts of the Spirit, especially the gifts of healing. And he himself had been healed. And it was a demonstrative thing for him. My mom and my dad were both quiet worshipers. They didn't make a lot of noise. We're Pentecostals. Let's own it, people. But my mom and dad didn't make a lot of noise. They were not the woo glory. No, my dad would lift his face toward the heavens and tears would stream down his cheeks. My mom would tuck her head just a little bit and hold her handkerchief there and raise a hand and just be very modest. They were both very modest people. Whatever happened to me, I do not know. But they were very modest people. I do have a memory of looking back and seeing my father and his father and my father's uncle, Uncle Marsh Shelton, my grandfather, Tommy Walter Shelton, and my dad, Bernice Shelton, standing in the Church of God on Pike Street in Pontiac, Michigan. And the Spirit of God moving in that service, and all three men had the same disposition: heads back, eyes open, tears rolling down their faces. And I remember registering in my consciousness, that's what it looks like to be spiritual. That's what it looks like to pray. And that was important because we had sort of a rowdy church. People could get rowdy. But I'm grateful for the people who lived a life of faith. And it wasn't just a Sunday thing with them. They lived it in the way they treated other people. My dad had an apple orchard, and we all worked it starting September all the way through to Thanksgiving. We'd come home from church, and our driveway would be packed with cars waiting for us to come home and let them go in the orchard and pick. And my dad would fill the bushel baskets, and he made it a point to help me understand what the Bible meant when it said, "Given it shall be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaking together, and running over." So he said, this is how we're going to give apples. When people order a bushel, we're going to give them a little more than a bushel. And he gently just shake it and give it. I am grateful for that witness. It wasn't a demonstrative thing. But people, if I mention my dad and my mom to anybody today, anybody that knew them, I guarantee you this is what they'd say. Your dad and mom were always the same. I knew them 40 years ago, and the last time I saw them just before they died, they were the same as they were 40 years ago. They just never changed, which used to irritate the daylights out of me because I wanted a little more affect, as a kid. But today I can say I really appreciate that constancy of their lives. So that's mine. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of memories that came up. First of all, I want to take a sidebar here and say that since the last time we've been on here, there's been two birthdays in here in the room, right? And so just wanted to acknowledge Ken's birthday and Ben's birthday, right? So happy birthday
Happy
to
birthday.
you.
It's the Kins and the Bins. They're like they
Yeah,
rhyme.
that's it. Lemon with the three-letter names.
Yes, Ken Ben. Uh,
Ben, we're kin to each other. I don't know.
awesome. Well, you brought up Pike Street, Ken, and my mom and dad got married at Pike Street Church of God, and they were fantastic people and certainly role models in my life. I lost dad in '99 and mom in 2011, but they left a a mark on our lives and just showed us how to be faithful, how to be the same person on stage as well as off the stage. Um, and they were who they were, and they just blessed so many people. I would say that my dad would give people the shirt off his back, even if it had uh, a knife hole in it from somebody stabbing him in his back. He just had a grace about him and just a love for people. And other people would have a lot to say about some people, but my dad just had this grace for people and just showed this love. And we're an example, mom and dad were for me. And mom, she was very pivotal in my life growing up. She uh, had me learn John 14. And my first message I preached was at 10 years old. And I actually just read John 14. And that, that was my first experience there. But I had it in my heart, and I could probably recite the whole thing now, but it's just made a mark on my life and helped me grow through life. And um, my my parents were just true blue, and they lived the life of example in front of me, and I'm so gracious and grateful for that. Because I know of others that have more difficult situations, and but my parents were truly role models in my life, and I'm thankful I can say that. Um, my dad worked both a secular job as well as full time in ministry in the inner city, so he
He was a
didn't
nurse, wasn't he?
make what's that?
Was your dad a nurse?
And my dad was a lab technician.
A lab tech. Okay.
Yeah, a lab tech, and he served in as a lab tech in Crittenden Hospital in Rochester, Michigan. He eventually became the boss there, running the lab. But Dad was his story. He was just a couple of years away from being a doctor, and he got called into the ministry, and everything stopped. At that point, here's a couple of fun facts. So at that time, my dad was studying to be a doctor, and he happened to be working with Jack Kevorkian,
Oh, wow.
and they were actually noted in newspapers all around the world that they had discovered a way to do blood transfusions on the battlefield, and because most of the bodies there are still warm, and so they were able to figure out how to make that happen right on the battlefield, and so. As another side note, really quick, Jack Kevorkian actually called my dad and asked him if he could use a room in our church to do his first assisted suicide. And my dad was like, no. So it didn't happen. But but anyway, he was on course to be a doctor, and he was about to break ground to established kind of a Dairy Queen kind of ice cream place. And that Saturday night, prior to that Monday morning of the groundbreaking, my mom said, Eddie, um, I want you to go to church with me. And so my dad reluctantly said yes. He wasn't serving the Lord at the time. This is back in the 60s. And so Sunday morning rolls around. My mom, had to really encourage him to get up, and get motivated to go to church. And they went to church that morning and was long story short, was saved Sunday morning, filled with the Holy Spirit Sunday night, called into the ministry, and they walked away from the whole ice cream business. And my dad went right into ministry. His grandma would tell him through the years, Eddie, you're going to be a preacher. And he would say, no, Grandma, I'm going to be a doctor. And so he knew when the bell was rung, amen, to be a preacher. And so Dad went right into ministry, went to Lee College. That's where I was born, in Cleveland, Tennessee. And then Dad eventually moved us to New Orleans, Louisiana, where he went to seminary. And then in '78, we came to Michigan. And Dad took his first and only church. It was in Rochester, Michigan, and eventually relocated to Pontiac, but it was the same church. But again, they lived the life, and I'm so grateful that they made an impact on my life, such as they did, and I'm honored to walk in a similar calling, being a pastor myself, and being able to help people. And I think I'm doing my dad proud, but I'm so thankful for them and the rich heritage that they brought to my life. And hey, because of them picking the church in Rochester, that's where I met my beautiful wife, and we'll be married 35 years this year. So glory be to God.
I think it's interesting, though. Each of us shared something from, I mean, Philip. I just called Ben Philip. That's my son's name, our youngest one. But Ben talked about his grandmother, but the rest of us did talk about our parents, one of our parents, and how much of an impact that that that's why we need both parents, right? We need both our mom and our dad, and that they are the ones that really do feed and lead, right? They feed into us both ways, right? Physically and emotionally, or yeah, physically and emotionally, but they also lead us. And that's why it's so important, especially in society today, that both parents are in the home and both parents are serving Christ and following him, so that they can pour that back into their children. And like with Ben's grandma, um, her bringing him alongside her, kneeling beside the bed, or I wasn't sure if that was what was happening, but yeah, that's we
I
need
talk
those.
about my mom and dad because if they're watching, I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Do
My
you
mom and
remember,
dad were important too. There, covered
do
it.
you remember when someone taught you to pray?
No one ever taught me to pray. I just
You know,
remember,
that's a yeah.
yeah, I just remember, Pentecostals, I mean, you pray. Like it's no quiet prayer. They're like jumping around. I remember my mama sitting up in the front pew and she would just go, ooh, and just start doing like this big, loud, you know, I don't know.
Tornado
It
warning
was,
system. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
But
have
it's,
memory is notoriously unreliable. We really think that we remember, but I do have a picture in my mind of my mother kneeling down with me beside my bed and teaching me to pray. And I have a picture uh, of me going to my mom another time when I was little because I had a sty in my eye, and I told my mom that this thing really hurts in my eye, and she said something to the effect, "Just do what I showed you." Just go and kneel down by your bed, put your hand over it, and pray, and Jesus will take care of it. So nobody had yet fooled me that he wouldn't do that. And sure enough, he did that in that instant. It just, that sty broke and it left and never was a problem after that. That's when I
My
started. That's when I started preaching in
my
my
brother
stalls.
my brother during service swallowed a marble and they took him up and prayed for him, and I'm pretty sure it didn't cause any problems. I don't know why I'm laughing. It was just so weird. I just remember looking at his face and he's like,
Well, does
it
that
was
mean does that mean he was a holy roller?
yes.
Come on
Yes.
now. You
Yep.
know that was good. You know that was good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But that's how it was when we were all kids. You go, well, I know in the Pentecostal churches, you go up to the altar. It didn't matter what was going on. You swallow a marble, you swallow a quarter, everybody's getting up, taken up to the altar to get prayed for.
Well, I grew up Baptist. We didn't do that. But
Oh.
you went up if you wanted to get saved or baptized or join the church. That's why you went up for. but I do remember. Of course, I remember my grandma praying with me, but I remember my dad praying with me when I got saved. Um, and I remember my mom, like her Bible was always on the kitchen table. And she'd be there reading and praying. Um, but what I really remember, and this is because if you know me, like this will make sense. I remember it was actually in like junior church, which I never went to. I didn't like it. But like they were very much like you got to fold your hands and bow your head and close your eyes and sit there, and that's how you pray. And I can remember thinking, that's stupid. Why do you have to do it that way? And but also was like, well, I mean, I guess that's how you're supposed to pray, right? You know, so I remember that, which really I'm like, there's a lot. You can pray with your eyes open. It's amazing, you know, like, but
Well, Jesus did.
I don't know. I'm like looked up, right? Like so even when I was little, like I was like, oh, like just I didn't know enough. Like I was a little kid, right? But like, could be also why I didn't like junior church because they're always telling me things, and I'm like, is that really true? Is that really how you're supposed to do that? But so I remember those things, and of course, when you think about like like we have children's church, junior church, whatever, Sunday schools, all those places, even as when I was really little on Wednesday night, they had this program they called it Eager Beavers, which my parents said I called Iggy Beavy. But
Who
I
came
hear
up
that.
with
I
that
hear.
name?
I have no idea. But some of my favorite people taught it, so of course I loved going it. So I was an eager beaver, I guess. But I'm sure I don't remember. I remember going to it. I don't remember a thing about it, but other than I really liked going to it, and that Mrs. Eckley taught it and things like that. So I remember the people though, and couldn't tell you a thing that ever happened there, but those people made a profound impact on my life, even when I was like 2. And so but not everybody has that. I mean, we've all talked about, especially family, right? Like that just poured into us and brought us up. And not everybody has those family members. And I was looking in my Bible. This is the Life Counsel Bible. Laura has one too. But I was reading an article in here just talking about, this thing we have in our culture where you're like, well, I didn't have a good father, so like I have a hard time viewing God as a father. And they're kind of arguing about it because that's kind of a bottoms up approach. And they talked about where that came from psychodynamic psychology, if you really want to look into it. But like, but where we really have a top down God who reveals himself from up here down to us. which is true, but also, the people on earth do influence how we view God. And it's not just dads, right? So we're not going to just knock dads. I mean, we're surrounded by people who, just cause ill will and ill feelings towards God, towards the church, and towards Christians, and all of these things, um, which is not an excuse for anyone, um, but they were talking about like God does reveal Himself, and and of course, as a life counsel Bible, so they're talking about like good counselors, but also any all of us are counselors or should be if we're spiritually mature. But we also do, in a sense, reparent people so that they see what a good father would look like. They see what a good sibling, brother, sister, mother, whatever. Right? We show them what God actually looks like as believers, and we do that as we counsel people, whether professionally, like Tor and I do, or even coaching or pastoring, all of these things that we all do, but just in our day-to-day interactions with people. And they referenced First Thessalonians 2, and Paul was talking to the church there, and they talked about, you can read the whole thing, it's First Thessalonians 2, 7 through 12 is what they referenced, but I'm just going to read the verses 11 and 12. And it's Paul talking. He says, as you know, like a father with his own children, we encouraged, comforted, and implored each one of you to walk worthy of God, who calls you into His own kingdom and glory. And I thought, well, that's what we do. We are like a father, like a parent, leading, encouraging, just building up people so that they can see that. But like I said, not everybody has that, and we don't want to remember some of these people. And so then it kind of gets to that question of like, what do we do? Like we all have people in our lives that we'd rather forget, but sometimes they've made a significant impact on us.
Don't you think it's easy to forget them, or do you think some people are notoriously hard to forget?
I think it depends on the impact they had,
Yeah.
right? Like there are some people, like they may have been harmful or just cruel in whatever way, and like they didn't mean anything, right? But if it's somebody who has an important position, they're harder to forget, right? If we've been abused by a family member, they might be hard to forget. Our best friend, just kind of deserting us, ghosting us, that's going to be difficult to forget. But so then it's like, well, what do I do with that? I don't want to remember these people, but that pain is still there, that wound is still there, and maybe we've even healed from it. And so we're still like, I still have that scar, and I still want to forget those people, and yet that scar reminds me every time.
There's been quite a bit written lately, again, about talking to yourself and the value of talking to yourself. And one of the things that separates us from all other creatures, as far as we know, is that we can see ourselves thinking. For us to be able to understand that right now I am thinking about thinking, and I am thinking about what I'm going to say to you, that it doesn't seem that a dog or a field mouse has that capability, although they have other skills that are enhanced, like, the sense of smell or other things. But because of that, I have had I've made a point of noticing the times when I talk to myself. And it usually happens when I don't realize it's going to, but I don't stop it. So it usually happens when I am involved in a right brain activity. Maybe I'm doing laundry. Maybe I'm vacuuming. Maybe I'm mowing. Maybe I'm doing something. Maybe I'm taking a shower. It's repetitive motion, and things are just sort of, not too technical. And all of a sudden, I'll just find myself, well, I know you didn't mean to do that, but you really hurt me. I'll say stuff. I'll hear myself saying things. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, most of us would do something like that. Um, we recall these characters in our history, our personal history, and we encounter them again in this moment. What would happen if I would see him today? I would say, you know what you did? It didn't stop me because I was going to do this anyway. What you did just, it made me second guess myself, but I'm glad I second guessed myself, And the reason for that is because we have one of two choices when it comes to confronting a problem in the past. We either let it continue to dominate us or we become the victor. And it is better to be the victor. I'd rather be the hammer than the nail, right? So it's better to be a victor. If I'm remembering that story, I'm going to, yes, I know I'm doing it. I'm going to twist it a little bit in my favor, toward my side, because it's only me in this conversation now anyway. And when I remember it, I'm not going to allow the horror of that negative moment to be relived in my life because I'm going to address it not as a kid, not as a teenager, not even as a young adult. I'm going to address it as a 73-year-old man who has experience so I can win. Not that I want to defeat that person, but I want to defeat that concept. And so I face him again. And when I face him in my now. And that's a very important concept. I know there's probably a name for it, but I don't know what it is. So seeing the past come alive today and being who you are today and not letting it suck you back into the past is a really important concept and example of victory, emotional and spiritual victory in our lives. Look at me now. You're not talking to a kid. Look at me now. You're not talking to a helpless 5-year-old that just believed everything you said. Look at me now. I'm a man. I have faith in God. God's been good to me. Let me tell you about Jesus. That dialogue helps us remember that this is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. It just helps us. And we need people in our corner all the time who remind us that we're greater than our most difficult experiences. I'm on your side. I'm standing behind you. But when those people aren't there, you better do it for yourself.
One of the things you were talking about, Ken, about it's like rewriting the narrative is what I usually call it. So we reflect back on our past, we reflect back on the trauma, and then we rewrite it from the outside looking in, right? So the abuser, like you try to see them through a different light, a healthier light, but you have to be able to be on the outside really when you're writing it. Ben does a was it narrative therapy where that you want to share that? I won't.
I can. There's a lot of different trauma therapies, and a lot of them are about well, not even recreating, but understanding the impact that things have had on us, giving different meaning to that. Kind of what you were talking about, Ken. But like one of the ones I use is written exposure therapy, and it's really just writing about what happened and then writing about how it impacted you. And you do it all in session and kind of leave it there, but your brain starts to reprocess this whole thing. And it's written exposure therapy is 5 sessions of writing, and that's it, right? But your brain continues to reprocess that event for 6 to 12 months afterward.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So, and there's other things, but like when you were talking about like talking to yourself, I teach people how to talk to themselves out loud. Right?
That's awesome.
I know it is awesome, and I didn't know this was not normal, but most people talk to themselves and they're like, I need to do this, right? um, the most effective way to talk to yourself is like, you need to get up and take the trash to the road, right? Because if I'm like, I need to get up and take the trash to the road, I'm going to ignore me because I don't want to.
So second person.
Yep. You get this other person telling you to do it, right? Which again, because we're humans, we can do this, right? We actually can create this dialogue with ourselves. We do this even with trauma. Um, when we go back, they talk about like, healing the inner child, all these things, but it's a thing and it does work. You can go back and talk to 5-year-old you,
You can.
and you can tell 5-year-old you what they needed to hear then. And it actually changes your brain. And over time, you do this enough, the impact that that event had at 5 or whatever age it was, that impact starts to shift in your present. How you respond to things changes in the present. It's powerful, and it's just really talking. You're talking to yourself,
That
literally.
is
Just at
that
a
is
different age.
so powerful. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's like that concept, and correct me if I get this wrong, Ben, but when we just put the words "I feel" in front of an unfortunate event, and we tell ourselves, "I feel awful about that. I feel hurt. I feel" the fact that I identified it, I labeled what it was, and I expressed how I felt about it changes where it registers in my brain. And when it changes where it registers in my brain, it takes it out of the fight or flight mode and brings it into a less reactive state in my mind because I know how I feel about a thing that occurred and I've labeled it. Now it doesn't control me.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yes, and of course, it sounds easy, right? But
Oh,
it's
none of that.
actually difficult to do, right? I mean, I think probably all of us have had to do this, but but it shifts that locus of control, right? When I'm focused on what you did to me, you still have all that power and control.
Yes.
When I shift it to like, I feel this way about that, right? I need this because of that, or I'm going to do this in response to that, right? All of a sudden, that locus of control shifts back to me, right? Where it belongs, right? I mean, think about, we're talking about fruit of the spirit at some point today. But love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, blah, blah. Last one is what? Self-control, right? When you talk about what self-control is, that's partly what it is. It's I'm not allowing other people to control me. I'm not allowing the circumstances to control me. I have self control. I don't have to be reactive. I can be responsive. It's different, right? I choose how I want to respond to this versus I just do whatever comes out of my mouth or say whatever comes out of my mouth, right? So, um, and so it's in that sense, it's biblical, but it takes work. If we just naturally did this, right? Well, one, I probably wouldn't have a job. There are people who do, right? But
That's funny.
there are people who naturally do this. I
Everybody,
think
please go see Ben and Talor.
right? But well, you two, neither. Well, Ken, you're retired. You don't count anymore. But like Tom, you wouldn't be a pastor.
I still count 1, 2, 3.
Get your toes out, get count up to 20, right?
That's
But
it.
right, what do I need a pastor for? I can do it all on my own.
Right.
Right?
It's just
Or
me and Jesus, brother. That's
right?
it. Me and Jesus have a good thing going, and don't you bother me none with it. Don't you put that on me. It's me and Jesus. Amen. Woo! I feel that. You feel that? Glory.
Yeah. Too bad. It's too bad God designed us to be relational,
Yeah.
right? You
Eugene Peterson is famous for having said, I forget which book it was in, but he said, I know you don't like them. I know you don't want to be with them, but we are the church. And God said we have to. We have to be with them. we, we have to put up with them, and they have to put up with you. I have another friend that used to say, God will either bless you or afflict you with people according to your need.
Mhm. I would take that even a step
I
further.
up with that. That really annoyed me that he said that because it was true.
It is true, right? And it's not just our need, right? Because God wants to grow us spiritually for the benefit of the church and the kingdom. So it's also like, hey, like I want to use you. I'm going to give you what you need to grow,
Yeah,
right? Like how do you you want to develop the fruit of the spirit? You need to be around people.
that's
How
it.
is she going to love?
That's
You
it.
know, how you going to have patience? You know,
I always say there's a pill for that.
there
What's the
is.
problem? What's your problem? There's a pill for that. Just joking.
There is a pill for that. I was just sharing today in my message that that we are to love, and a lot of people. There's a lot of folks out there, even in the faith community, that are um, doing Christianity. They're preaching the gospel or whatever the case may be, but they don't have love. And of course, the scripture is very clear about that. If you don't have love, you're just making noise. And I love that quote. I think it was John Maxwell who said it, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And so I think that makes a big difference in that. And hey, I've been on both sides of the offender and the offendee, right? And there's a lot of things that I regret, and a lot of things that I'm, I feel the pain from. But it is the way life is, and we continue to trust in the Lord and use His grace to help us get through. But I think that's some very encouraging points that were made today in regards to speaking to ourselves. I know that David. I mean, the scriptures say that David encouraged himself in the Lord, right? And so how did he do that? My guess is that he actually spoke audibly, and just spoke the word of God over his life. For the joy of the Lord is your strength. I'm not sure he had mirrors so much back then, but I always encourage people to speak to yourself in the mirror. Tell yourself that you will live and not die, and declare the words of the Lord, and that you will. You're a more than a conqueror, and you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength, and so forth. Just speaking life over yourself, and that you are not a victim of your circumstances. That God can redeem you or the situation. And I know I can speak that because I've lived it. I've seen it happen in my own life, and the tragedies and setbacks that have happened in my life. Um, I'm still going by the grace of God. Maybe you've heard this before. By the grace of God, I'm still standing. And so it's a continuation of not allowing our past to define our present and our future. What's happened to us, as the song says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And we use those things as perhaps a book by John Maxwell. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And if we can grab those moments in our life that have happened to us, good or bad, and learn from them and grow from them, and and then being able to see the other side of the coin. I remember, I think it was Brian Tracy, motivational leadership speaker, and he would say that that car that just cut you off? What was the reason that they cut you off? Oftentimes we have thoughts about that person that we don't even know. And we don't even know the circumstances. We don't know if they're on their way to the hospital or if they were just texting and driving or whatever. We don't know the whole picture. But he said, if you could place yourself in that seat, have you ever been in that seat before? Have you ever cut someone off? And got the horn blasted at you before? What were you doing at the time? Can you
I,
justify what you were doing? You know, Chances are maybe you could,
I
right?
think a very important aspect of all this, as it relates to memory, is what ticks us off about other people. It's kind of a little bit of what you said there, Tom, but it's usually a variety of maybe half a dozen things that when somebody does that thing or behaves that way, it just wears us out. I cannot stand that guy. Why does he do that all the time? Well, I think that there is enough psychological theory and perhaps proof that would suggest that, sorry, I said my phone is talking to me. It thinks I called Siri. Anyway, that basically teaches us this truth that when I see a dark thing in you that I don't like, it's because it looks like the dark thing in me that I don't like. And the only way I'm going to manage this dark thing in me is not to fix it in you, but to embrace it in me. It's, Carl Jung's, embrace the shadow theory, holding, find the darkness. When I say darkness, I don't mean spiritual darkness. Darkness is used as a metaphor for a lot of things. And in the church, we talk about darkness as it relates to sinfulness and horrible things. And so I want to be careful to say I'm not talking about that. But what I am talking about is when we see Christians behave in a particular way, and you're a Christian and you see Christians that behave in a particular way, or pastors that behave in a particular way, or have a bent to their personality, and you just can't stand that strong reaction shouldn't be happening. If you didn't really care, you wouldn't really care. But if you care that much, you must hate that thing in you. And if you hate that thing in you, there's only one way to deal with it, and that is to embrace it. I think, again, Jung was talking about shadow and persona. Embrace it and say, I'm not going to kick you out. It's part of what needs to be transformed. We stop having things to transform when we always project it onto other people. But when we embrace it in us, there's a new thing that can be transformed. And I can take it to the cross. And I can say, Lord, I saw that today. I thank you for so-and-so and what they did, and that I saw myself in that. And I bring that to the cross now because I don't like it in me. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'd like to share real quick.
ahead.
Ken, you might appreciate this, and you might remember it. Dr. Jerry Piscopo used to always say, "God puts people in your life as sandpaper
Yeah,
to kind of buff off those rough edges in our life and expose those imperfections that need to be sanded." And I think that's it. Especially, why does that thing bother us so much? Why does that one particular person get under our skin so badly?
right. Ben knows.
Well, one thing I tell people, like, sometimes people have a hard time, like, well, I can't embrace that. Or I'm always like, make friends with that thing. But, they don't like that, right? But
Yeah,
ultimately, what I want people to do, I'm like, be curious. What is this about? Like, just wonder. We need to wonder more about ourselves.
I love
Right.
that. That's good.
And I'm just like, well, I had a really strong reaction. I wonder what that was about. Let me think. I would say speak. I tell people this all the time too, right? Because we're talking about speaking to yourselves, talking out loud, because it slows your brain down so you can actually pay attention and think, or write it out. One of the two. There's not typing it. Typing it doesn't give us the same connection as actually writing. But we do need to be more curious. Like, oh, what is that about? What made me feel that, respond that way, and then then we can be willing to, like, one, just kind of accept it. Like, okay, like that's what this is about. If I don't accept it, I'm not going to change it. So people are like, well, I can't accept that. That's terrible. If you don't accept it, you do that, you're not going to change it. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's gonna own you.
yeah, but don't just stay there. Like, well, that's just who I am. All right, nope.
No. I think that's why coaching is so powerful too, because it helps ask the questions that we don't usually ask ourselves,
Mhm.
and it causes us to have some reflection upon our life. Helps us think about these very things that we're talking about today. I think that's very powerful, especially if we've not figured out how to engage that person within, and to be able to ask those questions that perhaps you know a, a coach or something of that nature will ask that question, and the coach has no factor whether you answer the question correctly or incorrectly, because it's all coming from you anyway. And when you are able to be faced to answer that question, it really can cause some people to get very nervous, right? Or very uncomfortable because they've never gone down that road before. And I think that's powerful. But if they just take the time, just pause and reflect on that thing, whatever that is that's happening or reoccurring, and not just move on. That's what we do as humans. We just move on. I'll deal with it later, but later never comes, right? And so, well, I think we've hit that hour, right? So, does anybody have anything else before we wrap up today?
I would just encourage everybody, if you've got those people that you just, I don't want to remember them, I don't, and but you're still thinking about them a lot. Yeah, maybe it's time, right? Let's do something about it, right? Don't just stay stuck in that, as we were saying earlier, right? Like there are people who, I mean, you got four here, but we all specialize in this, and there's a lot more like us because maybe you think we're all a bunch of weirdos and we're entertaining to watch, but you don't want to sit in an office with us. That's fine. But or if you're not sure and you need somebody, any of us will help you figure that out.
Absolutely. So we want to thank you all for joining us today. And if anything that we said today resonated with you, please share it with us. Reach out to us on this post that we're on right now. Inbox us or whatever the case may be, because we want to hear from you. And so, how can everyone get in touch with you, Ben and Talora?
So just go to our website, it's quascounseling.com. All of our contact information is there, and you can even message us from the website.
And Ken, how can people get in touch with you?
If you'll send me an email, I'll send one back to you. It's kensheltoninfo@gmail.com. Couldn't be easier.
And mine is just as easy. It's Pastor Tom Ray at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Please do us a favor and share this information, especially if you know somebody that could use this content today. And again, thank you for